Okay, fantastic. So I have another question for you. Are schools innovation and change prone institutions? You can write your answer or you can speak up. What do you think? Yes or no?
In general terms, I think the answer is no. In general terms, right? Schools
Hmm.
are like monoliths of traditions, and if I can make this analogy, but of course there are, you know, places where innovation is promoted, change is welcomed, but in
Yeah,
general terms,
in
I don't think
general,
so.
no. Right. What is the greatest enemy of innovation and change? Who else wants to share? Who, come on, try to guess. Comfort
Maybe
zone.
when people are limited in their own acceptance of changes, when they
Mm-hmm.
don't like changes.
Mm-hmm. Great, great, Yandara. Fixed mindsets. Any other?
I guess it's underestimating ourselves, thinking that we're not capable of that change. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm. Okay. All your answers, there's no right or wrong answer, but what I had in mind here from something I read is this. Do you know what this represents? What does this image represent?
like something.
Numbers.
Maybe the
Okay.
workforce.
Sorry?
Maybe the workforce.
Okay, but what strikes you about this image?
Maybe the routine, doing the same thing over and over again, the way we're used to doing things.
Okay, they're all the same. Okay, so what I wanted to show was about conformity, conforming, conforming to rules, conforming to types of organizations, right? So why conformity is the enemy of innovation. Conformity thwarts innovation. I'll give you 30 seconds to read the screen. Okay? Conformity is a creativity killer and as a consequence, a change killer, right? Conforming. Now, education is a typical institution that adheres to conformity. Education has been traditionally designed to teach people to conform. Have a read. Okay, so of course we have to conform to rules. Of course we have to teach children, to listen to others, to walk instead of run in the hallway, etc. But this inadvertently can lead us to other types of conformity that are not positive for the growth and for change and for innovation. Okay, so all right. So, what we're going to talk about today is based primarily on this article that I've already posted in our Google Classroom. okay, for you to read. So I'm going to draw some information from there and relate it to my experience as a teacher and an educational leader who has gone through lots of changes in education and ELT, and who has had to manage changes in an educational institution as well. So this is a very fresh book called Handbook of Practical Second Language Teaching and Learning. It's focused on teachers who are beginning their careers in multiple contexts around the world, which is really nice because usually these handbooks are for researchers, for specialists, but this handbook is for newbies, okay? Uh, Fortunately, my first interest in the handbook was the introduction written by David Noonan called The Changing Landscape of English Language Teaching and Learning. And this is the only one that is available for free for so you can have a taste of the book. So I was able to have access to the whole chapter. Now the book is for sale, and it's probably not cheap, but I'm gonna try to get a hold of it one of these days because I'm very interested. The authors of the chapters are the most prominent people in each of the topics that they write about, and what I really like about it is because it's geared towards teachers who are beginning their careers all around the world. So I'm going to be drawing a lot from this chapter. um, it's like a summary in a way, but making connections. And you can read it because I've just posted it. You can read the whole chapter. Okay. So, as we talked about before, this is one of the first thoughts that David Noonan shares in his article. Education is inherently conservative, as we've just mentioned. When responding to the ebb and flow of economic times, the demands of industry, the pace of social change, and the disruptive power of technology, it is anything but nimble. Now, I want to go back to 30 years ago, okay? So go back with me to 1994, okay? So we are back in 1994, and it's funny because I was researching materials for this mini course, and I came across this article. I wasn't familiar with it before. I found it very relevant to start for our first session because that's exactly what we want you to lead, a change in teaching, right, in our institution. And I remembered an experience that I had with a book by David Noonan. So back in 1994, I had been teaching for 5 years. I was already a course supervisor, which at that time in my institution was called the course supervisor. The equivalent of course coordinator, but at that time they called it supervisor. Now, this term supervisor is not even used anymore in for educational roles because of what theories of management, etc. So I was a course supervisor, but I was also teaching, right, which was part of my role. So we used materials. We used a book by Heinle and Heinle that today is National Geographic Learning. It became Cengage and then National Geographic Learning. We used this course book for adults that had dialogues. And so every unit was introduced with a dialogue, and then we practiced the dialogue. We did drilling, and then there was work on whatever was introduced in that dialogue, work in the language, lots of repetition exercises, etc. Okay, because we were like in the transition between an audiolingual approach to teaching to a communicative approach, but still in the situational perspective of the history of language teaching. Okay, and then the institution decided to be bold and to adopt a completely new course book called Atlas by David Noonan in 1994. Look at that, 30 years ago. So I thought, oh my God, I have to tell this story because this article is by David Noonan. And Atlas was a completely different course book from anything we had ever seen. It was task based, it focused on discovery learning, the language was functional, and it was completely focused on learning centeredness. Look at how advanced he was. Okay, this was 30 years ago. And he was talking about the learning centered communication, not learner centered, because we went through the stage of learner centered and now people talk about learning centered. But back in 1994, he was already talking about this. Now, I want to ask you, did it work? What do you think? 30 years ago, with a group of teachers who were used to the kind of material that I'm talking about, do you think it worked? Do you think this concept and this methodology and this course book stayed for a long time?
Probably not. Yeah.
It did not work. Hard as the supervisorial team, and we brought the author to talk about the book. We brought consultants from the publisher to talk about this new approach because now it's communicative language teaching and all of that. But it didn't work because, if we do not manage this change correctly, people will not buy in because we never understood the why. So, what was the teacher's problem? Where's the grammar? Where are the dialogues for memorization and drilling? Where are the repeated transformation exercises that we were used to doing? So we missed a lot of things that were part of our reference in teaching. And we got desperate because, there was a lot of input. Yes, David Noonan went a little too far because his book was not I+1, it was I+3. So it was barely comprehensible. So he went too heavy on the natural approach thing. Okay. But there was a lot of innovation there, a lot of innovation. And when we look at this now, this is what we're still trying to do. Isn't that true? 30
100.
years later, this is what we're still trying to do. Okay. So this is also from a quote from his book. And look at that. It's been 30 years. I was like, oh my God. I went, okay, I'm going to talk about Atlas. When was it published? And when I saw 1994, and I said, oh my God. So really, I have to talk about this because it was written by David Noonan, the author of the chapter that I chose to start this mini course with. So in education, a significant change can take up to 30 years to take root. So this is what I see from my experience as a teacher and as a course supervisor, trying to implement an innovation that people were not ready for. Now, does that mean that we have to wait until people are ready? No, but we have to work on getting them ready. Because if we wait until people are ready, we're always going to be behind. Okay. Now, I'm also going to talk about two visionaries mentioned in David Noonan's article. One of them is John Dewey. John Dewey was probably one of the most influential educator after Paulo Freire, perhaps. So look at this. In 1916, he said that the purpose of education was not to inculcate subject knowledge, but to develop critical thinking skills that would equip students for lifelong learning, a view that was generations ahead of its time. Dewey, okay, John Dewey. And Bruner. my favorite cognitive psychologist. Now, this quote is from 2006, but his idea is from much, much before that, okay, from the 50s, 60s. The role of the teacher is not to transmit facts, which would soon would become redundant. So you see, he predicted that facts would become redundant in the 60s, but to scaffold. So he was the first person to talk about, he's the owner of this expression, scaffolding of learning. But to scaffold the learning process through guided inductive procedures. Guided inductive, not deductive, inductive procedures. Focus in the classroom should be on the learner, not the teacher. There should be more learning, less teaching. And we are here working on the two-thirds framework and having a hard time getting teachers to adhere to our two-thirds framework. The two-thirds of your class should be focused on the students producing and learning, and not on the teachers explaining, getting into details about the grammar, showing their knowledge of phonology. Oh, look at this. It's a the because you put your tongue between your teeth, and showing the chart so that they can understand the symbol because I love phonology, or explaining grammar because I love grammar. So I have to tell them all the types of relative clauses, and I have to say them, and I have to use a terminology to show how good I am at languages as a teacher. But what about my students? Is that what they need to know? Right? So I'm sharing bits and pieces and commenting from the text. Okay. So time for you to read. So this is what we're responsible for. We are preparing our students for a future that is unknown. We do not know. Nobody knows what the future will be like. But one thing we know is that it's not about content knowledge, because that they can have at the tip of their fingers. They're using their electronic devices, internet, artificial intelligence, and all those sort of things. I myself use AI a lot to save time on certain things, right? To help me start out something. So the shift of focus from teachers and input to learners and output. Okay. So though I'd really like to read this because this is very important. Those who advance this view argue that for language educators, the question should no longer be, what content do my students need to learn? But what resources and skills do they need in order to communicate competently? So it's not that content is not relevant. There has to be content, but there has to be an integrated approach to syllabus design. And what is this integrated approach? And what should this integrated approach entail? Competency-based education, working on competencies. And he divides the competencies into cognitive, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. So the cognitive competency is our knowledge of the language, right? When we talk about grammar rules, when we talk about vocabulary, learning vocabulary, etc., this is cognitive, right? This is part of the cognitive competency, and it's very important. But it's one of three important competencies. We also need to develop interpersonal competencies, which involve uh, being able to work in a team, being able to understand others, to put yourself in other people's shoes, to respect diversity, to have a multilingual perspective of the world, to listen. Yes, Alexandre, please, folks, go ahead and contribute, okay? So to listen, so this is very, very important, and we see this lacking. Many leaders have been saying that this is lacking in the workforce. People are not able to do these things, right? And intrapersonal, critical thinking, yes, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, right? The four C's and much more than that. And intrapersonal, managing your emotions, managing your time, right? Managing your time, uh, managing your anxiety, managing your learning, right? Being able to manage your learning, manage how you're going to learn, which strategies you're going to use, etc. So these are all very important. And language is at the core of all of this. None of this is done without language. Okay? Even when we talk about content, learning content that is not our content, right? And we're going to talk about what our content is in a minute. So even when it's not about uh, 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 um, the cognitive aspect, for the interpersonal and the intrapersonal competencies to be developed and to be enhanced, we need language. We need language. Language is at the core of everything. However, now read this. So unless we're talking about grammar rules, which only develops declarative knowledge, which is knowing how to explain something, but not really knowing how to use it, because knowing how to use is procedural knowledge, right? The content in a language program comes from elsewhere. It doesn't come from language itself. So language is a parasite. Have you ever thought about this? This is completely new to me, seeing language as a parasite. So language isn't this mind blowing? Language is a sort of parasite because in order to teach language, the content is elsewhere. The content lies in teaching our students to talk about things that are related that they're going to use in their real life, in various environments, in various contexts. So language is a sort of parasite. How about that? Now, this is taken from another material that Pearson released. It's called. Can you see it? Well, I think you can. I think you can. It's called. It's a report that Pearson released this year about the impact of English. It's a very nice report. I'm going to upload it to the classroom as well, so you can have a look. But it talks about impact of English in all fields. Okay, for companies, for schools, for lots of things. And here, this part is for educators. Okay. So for those in formal education who are training the workforce of the future, change needs to happen. Now, we do need to discuss whether education's role is only to train the workforce of the future. And this is something that David Noonan talks about. There are these different views of what education is for. There are views that are more like utilitarian, like education is to train the workforce, and there are views that are more humanistic. Education is to feed the soul and the mind, etc. And we don't have time to discuss this here in detail, okay? But even if we do, even if you are more on the side of education as food for the soul and for the development of your mind, etc., we do need to remember that yes, our students are going to need skills and competencies for their work, for their academic life, etc. And these are things that we need to focus on. So I'll give you some time to read and reflect on them. So what strikes you? Well, I want to hear from you. Is this surprising? Is this something that you've already seen? What's your reaction? How does it relate to your experience and the change that we need to lead? And you are our change agents, right? You are the fact that you joined this course shows that you are teacher leaders, because leadership is not a position. You know that, right? You can be a manager and not be a leader. You can be a leader and not be a manager. So you are teacher leaders. Just from the sheer interest of your being here shows you that you're interested in this, right? Anything that strikes you that you'd like to share from this?
I think it's a very good point you mentioned that we're here because of our sheer interest in this respect. But I'm here too, not only because of that, because I need to fight my own fears. Because I fear one of my fears is that the pendulum goes too far in the other direction, and we miss the very content of, like, as much as we know that language is not only about content. I think that I need to, the way I see it now at this point in 2024, is that I need to strike a balance between one end and the other end, right? Like language, we need language to be able to, we need content to be able to teach general English skills. Because I know, well, learners and in their workplace and, in every aspect of life they operate in, we need to negotiate, we need to give opinions and make suggestions about what? About things. So it's something that I fear a lot, right? So I'm here because of that.
Wow, that's fantastic. And Alexandre, what you mentioned here is very important. There is a book that I really, really like. Um, it's called, oh my God, when I have to remember these things, it's about change in education, right? It's Schools That Learn. Okay, yes, it's called Schools That Learn. And it's a notebook. It's from the early 2000s, and it talks about change, because schools that embrace change are schools that learn. So I really like the way he puts it, and he talks about how we can manage change in schools and how we can learn at schools. And he says that the first step is to challenge our mental models. If we do the first, we only start changing when we look at our mental models and we challenge them. If we do not open our mental models for our own criticism, we will not change. So change starts by reanalyzing our mental models, and you talked about that. Reanalyzing your mental models. Okay? Yes. Yes, Yandara.
This reminds me of Paulo Freire's idea, and when he told us that he managed to alphabetize, I don't know how to say that in English, but when he managed to do that with hundreds of adults in very poor life situation. And it helps me to disconnect, if I'm teaching about body. I don't know, but the child is really interested in cars, for example. Like, okay, I will ignore the content. I will ignore that I have to, to teach body language, and I will manage that structure in a sentence that will engage the student. And then later on, I can put a person inside the car and start analyzing the body parts and then go back to the content. So I try to remember of Paulo Freire. He managed to, to pass on information to a lot of to a big group of people who had no knowledge at all, and that's very powerful.
Yes, I stopped sharing so we can see each other because I'm really interested in this conversation. This is very nice.
I
Yes,
was
so
trying to focus with everybody very small as well, so that
yes, yes,
clearly.
yes. And I realize, why am I doing this? This is something that I'm learning from our digital mentors, Marilyn and Raquel. They're helping the folks teaching in remote classes how to uh, revisit some of the procedures that they're doing. And one of this is, not to keep sharing all the time the screen so you can see everybody and
Nice.
people can see everybody and we can have a communication. So we're always learning, right? We're always adapting. And when we talk about, okay, so think about, you mentioned, Alexandre, that we will have to teach, they will have to collaborate, they will have to share their point of view, they will have to convince other people, etc. So perhaps the language of doing this is more important than details about grammar. So if they know the language for negotiating, if they know the language for showing empathy, if they know the language for taking turns politely, etc., and maybe they miss the verb form, perhaps they will be more successful than if they get the verb form right, but they don't use the language that will make them succeed in these types of competencies. Yes, does that make sense? Yes, Tatiana, go.
First, sorry, I didn't realize my camera was off, but I was here. No, I was thinking it's possible to do the two things in one class.
Yes.
For example, yesterday I taught a junior D class, and the point was like talking about the elderly people and how they interact and stuff. So all the vocabulary that the book wanted them to internalize, let's see, I made them talk about that, ask questions, and answer questions based on their real life. So like there was a lot of personalization. Do you eat with your grandma? Do you play games with your grandpa? Stuff like this. They talked a lot about it. In terms of language, this is not something new because in junior they are supposed to know how to talk in the present, how to use the present tense. Okay, but it's totally possible, for example, to teach them this in junior A or whatever basic one, right? Starting from their own experience. So, for example, you have like, what do you do in your free time? Okay, we can, for example, start by the exponents on the board, bring from them. What kind of things can we do in our free time? Right, 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 right. Okay, then they will repeat for pronunciation, not for drilling. And then they can start asking each other in open pairs. So like, Alexandre, what do you do in your free time? Then Alexandre is going to say, I read a lot. I love books. Okay, Alexandre, now ask Maria de Fatima. What do you do in your free time? So everybody asks, everybody gives real answers. Then everybody can practice that in pairs. Okay, we can change the information gap. Okay, now talk about what you do in your on your vacation. Can you do the same things? Yes, we can, but we can do others. What else can we do? And then you include more information. In the end, you'll have a lot of vocabulary that came from them. And then we can talk about grammar.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yes.
made them speak. You personalized a lot. They acquired a lot of vocabulary. And then you go to the board and then you put the question. Okay, how did you ask the question? What did you use to? I used do. Okay. Then how did you answer the question? Oh, the verb didn't change because it's I, you. So it's changing the process.
Exactly, because they have to experience the language
Yeah.
before, and then by
But
doing this, you're giving them the opportunity
but
to learn inductively.
yeah, so just to calm people down, like you will teach grammar. You will. But that's the last part.
Can I just reflect on one part? Instead of you will teach grammar, what about they will learn grammar?
Exactly. Thank
Because
you.
that changes,
Yeah,
it
they will
seems like a
learn.
small
Yeah,
detail,
yeah.
but the way you described, you're not teaching. You
My
didn't
point
teach
my point is
because you
maybe
elicited.
you
Yeah.
will you will pass on the rules. They will acquire those rules, internalize and start
Yeah.
using them,
Yes.
you know?
But focus on talking about what they like. You're not going to teach the simple present.
No, never.
You're teaching them how to talk about, ask
Their
questions about
lives.
what they like. You
Exactly.
see? And
Yeah.
then, for example, suppose you are teaching a group of adults who have the same content, and they're interested in learning English for work. Okay, so how could you at your work, suppose you're using English, how could you, in what situation would this kind of content be useful? Right? Focus on the function and meaning. And in your context, you will still need, because sometimes, especially beginners, they say, oh, I want a business English class for beginners. There is no business English class for beginners. Because, there's no difference between saying the book is on the table or the computer is on the table or the tire is on the table, or I don't know, whatever it is, so there needs to be some, but then they can relate. Okay, but I can ask, do you like about other things, right? Do you like colder, or do you like the air conditioning this way? Do you like, so you can use this in the workforce, right? So you can relate, as the quote said, as the last slide said, relate what you're teaching to their situation. I was talking to a teacher who's teaching Turbo, which is focused on only on adults. It's a low cost course. It's a pilot, and they were learning about what they're doing, what people are doing, etc. So, and then the teacher asked, so how could you use this for work? For example, when you send your email, oh, dear manager, dear blah blah blah, I'm writing to da da da. So you're going to use this structure in a professional situation. You're just going to change the context, but it is useful. So showing students, even at the basic level, how this can be useful. I thought that was so smart of her, to do that.